Capital Views is sponsored by Northrim Bank, Alaska Oil and Gas Association, ConocoPhillips, and Linden.
Hi, I'm Tim Bradner with Alaska Legislative Digest, and welcome today to Capitol Views. And a special welcome to Dan Robertson, Director of the Division of Research and Analysis at the Department of Labor. Dan, your group is the state's chief labor economist. You track workforce issues, a lot of concern about labor scarcity, the outmigration of working age population, and whether we're going to have enough people to really run our economy in a few years. So thanks for joining us. And what's the latest that you're hearing about this?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Um, the we have a lot of opportunity coming our way. In Infrastructure Act money will just going online or getting overcoming those final hurdles so that it for sure will happen. But you're right, we have and we have had since fairly soon after COVID more open jobs and applicants, qualified applicants ready to take those jobs, ready and willing to take those jobs. So, and part of this, it's a national phenomenon, and it has something to do with the baby boomers aging out of their prime working age and the generation coming behind them being smaller. But in Alaska, we've also had for 11 consecutive years now, more people leaving the state, moving away from the state than moving to the state. And that hasn't changed our 65 plus population. That population has grown, not because we're attracting those people, but because people who are already here are aging in place. But the working age population has shrunk. It shrunk meaningfully. In fact, it shrunk more for Alaska over the last decade than any other state as a percentage than Wyoming and West Virginia. So there's something about people's perception of living in Alaska that's changed. And it's not primarily because more people have left as that fewer people have come. But the net result, as you talked about, is that employers are struggling to find enough workers to maximize all this opportunity coming our
So, Dan, are wages increasing to sort of balance this? Employers offering higher pay to attract workers? What
Yeah,
is
they've had to. Minimum wage has become almost irrelevant because the market has demanded that employers, even at traditionally very low wage jobs, you just have to, as an employer, pay more to get applicants. And markets work that way. If you're not getting any applicants at a certain wage over time, you have to sweeten the offer, and that's happened. It's still happening, and there's probably more of that that will have to happen. But yes, wages have gone up and will likely continue to go up over the next few years, maybe even the next five plus years, because of all this Infrastructure Act money coming our way and all this need to find workers and the inability to really do without them. So you labor costs, you just have to pay more.
and the problem with this also is that every state has its own version of this, and every state has infrastructure money, so we're competing with out of state workers. Uh, are we? Are we going to be able to offer enough to offset inflation? And is there still a kind of a regional differential between Alaska and the lower 48 or the Pacific Northwest in terms of living costs?
That's one of the things that makes this a challenge is that historically, Alaska has been a very high wage state relative to other states. When I say historically, primarily the 70s and 80s, and then just slowly that went away. Some of it went away in the 90s, but for a while now, we've been just a little bit above average in terms of how much somebody can make here compared to how much they can make in the country on average overall. And several neighboring states, Washington, Oregon, California, they pay more than we do in some of the important occupations. We the other side of that a little bit is that we used to be a very high cost place, a cost of living, housing in particular. That's not true as much as it used to be. Housing still is a little bit more expensive here, but Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, on the East Coast cities, they've all had more housing increases than we have. So on the one hand, we don't pay as much relative to the other states. On the other hand, our cost of living is not as exorbitantly high relative to other states as it once was.
But some living costs are still high,
For
healthcare.
sure. Yeah, except for housing, we are still a high cost state. Groceries, healthcare, services, goods and services in general. Some of it's harder to get stuff here. Services, we have a small population. So housing aside, there is still a cost of living differential in Alaska that probably isn't going away.
Well, and the loss of the, working age population, and these are families that are moving out. So kids are moving out with them, and it's reflected in school populations?
That's right. That's right. And we're about to do we're finishing up a study on the leavers, the people who left, what kind of work they did when they were in Alaska. But to your point, if you lose working age people, these are people who tend to have children in our school system, and we've seen that happen. We used to be uh, a net gainer from people in their 30s in particular. Now, over the last 10 years or so, more of those people have left and come to Alaska, and that means that more school age population kids have left Alaska than moved to Alaska, and that has reduced school enrollment almost across the board.
And that kind of plays out in another issue too. Uh, school schools are funded based on a per student count. So when the count goes down, the funding goes down, and it creates a problem for school districts because their fixed costs, their heating, utilities, insurance, are still high, even climbing. So the relationship between variable revenues, I guess, and fixed costs are going the wrong way.
It's tricky that's not all costs are tied to the per unit, whether it's school kids or I mean certainly I'm trying to think of some other examples. University would be another example, and the facility costs, and especially if the facilities are aging a little bit. Alaska's got a backlog of deferred maintenance that needs to be done. If we don't do it, it costs more later. So it puts some pressure on budgets for sure. And I think the K-12 what category would be the most obvious.
Uh, Dan, is there anything we can do to turn this around in the near term? Maybe some advertising. What a great place Alaska is to live, and
It's
that's
such a good question. I mean, we've always had a strong pull. People want to come to Alaska, young people in particular, and that's a nice asset for us. The young people who have come recently haven't stayed as long. And the why is critically important. Housing is probably a factor, but quality of life broadly, and that means different things to different people, really matters. And we're not doing well by that metric right now. So it's worth thinking about. It's worth figuring out what is missing. What are we not doing that we used to be doing? What's different here than other states that's creating this trend?
we should be running national advertising of the big fish people can catch here.
And we do that. I mean, the tourism industry does a wonderful job, and tourism interest is at an all-time high. We set records for the number of people who came here on cruise ships, and we'll match or beat that record in 2024. So people want to come to Alaska. That's a different proposition than whether they want to live here year round. And schools are important. I think this budget kind of situation that we just keep kind of uh, trying to figure out and not quite getting to the point where we have a relatively stable budget year to year. Other states don't have this kind of potential volatility that we do. So that's a factor for us. Our key institutions struggle if they don't know how much money they're going to get by wide ranges from year to year.
Well, well, this is a problem that's not going to go away anytime soon. So I'm sure we're going to be revisiting this. And Dan, thank you to you and your group for tracking this, so we'll have good data on it. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.